It is a mentality that shuns excuses and focuses on what's at stake. A mindset that resolves within itself that you must totally empty yourself to experience victory. A memory that remembers that who and what you are playing for is bigger than you.
Welcome to episode 11 of the Fourth Quarter Christianity Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Webster, and as always, I am thankful that you decided to tune in to today's episode. Today we have with us Don Blackwell, the director of the Gospel Broadcasting Network, better known as GBN. We talk about things ranging from how to deal with adversity, how to deal with the onslaught of emotions after experiencing a traumatic event, and also how to arm oneself with hope. And so I hope and pray that you would gain a lot of inspiration and encouragement from this episode. Please share this episode, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also give us a rating and review if you haven't done so already. We're so thankful again always for you, and please stay tuned. Now we'll get right into the episode. We're done. Hey, Brother Don, it's great to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to be with you, brother.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I told you before we even started how that you were instrumental in my conversion. Back in 2014, football coach taught me the gospel, and he immediately gave me the video, Why There's So Many Churches, to watch and to study. And that just led to more questions and eventually to my baptism at Northside Church of Christ in Butler, Alabama. So I'm thankful for that already, and I'm just very appreciative, and it is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here with you. I love to hear about the good that the videos are doing, and I think that we're reaching people with Gospel Broadcasting Network and World Video Bible School by the hundreds and thousands. We oftentimes don't know the number of people we're reaching until they reach out and tell us, and so like you telling me your story encourages me so much. And then you went on to preach the gospel, and everyone that you are reaching is a result. And so it kind of spirals that way. So glad to be here.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. What I'd like to do before we begin is just give the speakers a brief moment. I know you just mentioned the Gospel Broadcasting Network. Just give a brief moment to introduce yourself so that everyone can know you better.
Okay. My name, of course, is Don Blackwell. I am currently the director of the Gospel Broadcasting Network. This last December was 10 years that I have been the director of GBN. I've been working with GBN since even before we launched in 2005. And so in the 16th year I've worked with GBN. I've been doing videos for World Video Bible School. I'm not even sure how many years it's been. 15 to 20 years going back doing that. And those two works are both very near and dear to my heart. And if people are looking for good work to support that's reaching a lot of people, they can reach out, and I'd be glad to tell them about GBN and World Video Bible School. I am currently in transition to move to the Cookeville, Tennessee area. I've just bought a house in Cookeville, and I am going to be the new pulpit preacher at the Willow Avenue Church of Christ there. And so if anyone is in the area and they want to come see us, or if they're passing through, it's on Interstate 40. When you go through Nashville, about approximately an hour east of Nashville, you will go right through Cookeville. In fact, on I-40, you will see our church building sitting there on the hill at the top of the exit. And so please stop in and see us there. Married, my wife and I will have been married 30 years this May. We've got 3 children, 2 daughters that are both out of the house and married. Our oldest she has a daughter, so we've got 1 grandbaby. And our youngest is our son, Brandon, and he's currently a student at the Memphis School of Preaching. So a little bit about me.
So Brother Don, what I want to do is just go back to 2019. And 2019, I know that your life changed. I just want to talk to you a little bit about that, and maybe just get the context and the story of what happened back in 2019.
Okay. 2019, I had gone to do a gospel meeting in Virginia. I was going to the congregation where Brother Eddie Gilpin was preaching at the time, and that was the West Side Church of Christ in Salem, Virginia. I had started a meeting that Sunday, and my wife had gone with me. We were kind of making it a pleasure trip. And so Sunday, in fact, we got into town late Saturday night. We went out to eat, and Sunday I started the meeting, and I preached all day Sunday. And then Monday, Eddie had invited Sherry and I out to their farm. They had, I don't know, a sizable farm, 100 acres or something, and kind of on the side of a mountain, very beautiful. And they said, why don't we, in fact, they said they were going to take us to a local restaurant. And so we visited for a little while, and they said, let's go to the restaurant. And we walked out in the backyard, and they said, let's get on the four-wheelers. And I thought, what kind of restaurant are we going to on the four-wheelers? And so anyway, Sherry and I got on one, and Eddie and Jeannie got on the other, and we followed them, and they took us out on their property, and they had tables set up and food set up, and had a really nice meal, and their restaurant was something they had set up on their property. And so we sat and visited and just had a really nice meal. When it was over, they said, would you like to see the rest of the farm? And so we followed them on the four-wheeler, and we went up way up on the hill so that you could see down. In fact, if I had known, I could have brought some pictures and throw them up and let you see them, because I had my iPhone, I was taking pictures, and there's a good shot looking down the mountain. And we got to the top, and we took a picture, just a gorgeous place. And Eddie took a picture of us. And then we started down the hill, not knowing what was about to happen. I got to going rather fast because it was a really high-powered four-wheeler. I probably had it up to 50 miles an hour. And I got to thinking, I'm going too fast. And so I slowed down. I got to probably 20 miles an hour. And that's the last thing I remember. I don't remember an accident. I don't remember anything. So the rest is what has been relayed to me. I was told that the four-wheeler flipped. Nobody knows why. They don't know if we hit something, if it was a dip, but we flipped it 4 times. Sherry flew off the back in one direction, and I flew off in the other direction. And somehow I doubled over or whatever, and it just snapped my back right in half. They said that it also knocked me unconscious. And so Eddie heard what had happened, and he jumped off his four-wheeler and he ran back to me. And when he got there, I was unconscious. He thought I was dead. Sherry was far enough away, and she injured herself. She cracked the base of her back, her tailbone, and she was lying there and couldn't get up. So she could hear at a distance what was going on. And she said she was lying there just praying that I wasn't dead. He's trying to wake me up. I'm unconscious. Eventually I woke up, and he said that I was saying, please move me. I can't breathe. And I was just begging him to move me. And he wouldn't, because he was scared of what might happen. And they called an ambulance. Took a long time for the ambulance to get there because they were kind of out in the middle of nowhere. When the ambulance got there, they said, this is beyond our ability. So they had to call for a medevac helicopter. And so they came and loaded me on the helicopter, and they took me to the hospital there in Salem. And they put my back together so that I've got metal rods on each side and screws holding it together. But they were not able to do anything with my spinal cord. I don't know if it's severed, if it's bent, if it's folded. I really don't know. But I'm what they call a T6 at the T6 vertebrae from about here down is I don't know if you see this on the camera. From
Yes,
about
sir.
here down is I'm completely paralyzed. And so the next thing I know, I wake up in the hospital, and I remembered I was riding the four-wheeler, everything was fine. And then they woke me up in the hospital, and I seemed okay. I felt okay. And the doctor said, do you know who you are? And I said, yes. He said, tell me your name. Do you know the date? And who's the president? He asked me some basic questions. And I did not know what was going on. And I said, why am I here? How did I get here? And he said, you were in a four-wheeler accident. At that point, I was thinking I'm okay because everything seemed okay. And then it occurred to me, I can't move my legs. It didn't occur to me at the time what was going on because, there's no telling what they'd done to me in the hospital. And he said, you injured your spinal cord. And I said, will I ever walk again? And he said, no. And so at that moment, it was absolutely devastating, but I was still kind of out of it. And so if you've ever had a dream where, you have this terrible dream and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to wake up from this and this is not real.
Right.
I kept thinking, I'm going to wake up from this and this is not going to be real. But I would drift off and I would wake up and it would be real. And this happened for the next 24 hours or so until it occurred to me, this is real. And at that point, it was utterly devastating. And I realized, where is Sherry? And they said, she's fine. She's in another hospital room. She also had some injuries, but she's fine. She's going to recover. And so I trusted them and didn't worry about her. I trusted she was okay. And over the next week or so, they were giving me a lot of high-powered meds and keeping me out of it. And after about a week, they started trying to get me to sit up. And when I would try to sit up, I was so dizzy, I just couldn't handle it. And I stayed there for a week. And then they put me on a plane, an individual plane where one of these really narrow ones, and they put my wheelchair in there and my head's just almost touching the ceiling. It's so narrow. They flew me to Shepherd Center in Atlanta. And I spent the next 2.5 months there in rehab, and got out right before PTP in 2019. And they invited me to speak and tell my story there. And so that's kind of the short version of what happened.
It's so easy to sort of craft a narrative in which your injury led to even more devastating outcomes, such as, hospital bills, things of that nature, physical challenges, the change of vehicles. But does there exist a possibility of redemption? And what I mean by redemption is that action of regaining possession of something in exchange for a payment of something else. Do you believe redemption is possible in a world where good people suffer due to being a victim of just everyday circumstances?
Of course, when you think about spiritual redemption, that's always going to be available to us. As far as regaining something from the physical perspective, the doctors say that when you have an injury like this, they rate you first by your spinal cord injury. So I'm considered a T6. Then they rate you as a complete or an incomplete. If you're complete, that basically means you're not going to get back ability. If you're an incomplete, it means you may slowly over the next number of years start getting various functions back. I'm considered a T6 complete. So will I regain any of that? I won't from that perspective. I've thought oftentimes about this accident from the standpoint, is there something that will change me spiritually? And I've thought a lot about the things that you experience in life, and you go back to that moment and you wonder, was I ready to die at that moment? I think if someone had asked me at that point in time, I think I would have said yes. But now looking back, I thought over and over again, was I really ready to die at that moment? And I think that's something each of us needs to ask ourselves, because I had no intention of that happening that day. I'd made no preparations for something like that happening. I know the hotel, our stuff was scattered in a hotel room like you do in a hotel room. I had taken, I had a gun with me and I had left it there in the room. I would have never left that out thinking that a stranger is going to come in and get it. The point is, I wasn't expecting anything. I'd made no preparation, and bam, I almost lost my life. And that can happen to any of us. And now I look back and think, what if I had died that moment? Would I have been ready to meet the Lord? And now I try to live all the time. We always should, and I've always said it and I've always preached it, but now it's more real to me than it's ever been. I try to live all the time like, what if something happens to me and I die? Because I was this close. And if it had happened, would I have opened my eyes to see angels carrying me to paradise like Lazarus in Luke 16? Or would I have been like the rich man and opened my eyes in torment? And when I look back, I think about things that might not have been right. Were there people that I needed to fix things with? Did I have stumbling blocks in my life? Could pride have gotten the best of me? And so it's made me look at those things and change some things to make sure that I'm living right. And I think every one of us, though we might answer, yeah, I think I'm going to go to heaven, really stop and consider that question, because you don't know how real this really can be for you. And when you think about the fact that the Lord tells us to do this, that each of us should be considering ourselves, whether we're in the faith. 2 Corinthians 13:5, examine yourselves whether you be in the faith, test yourselves. When he says examine yourselves whether you be in the faith, he doesn't mean check to see if you're a Christian. He wrote this to Christians. So when he says examine yourself to see whether you're in the faith, he means you as a Christian, see if you are really walking in the light. Examine yourself to see if you're walking in the light. And that's something that we ought to be doing daily. This has made me do it a lot more than I ever have before.
It's interesting. I've heard people after an experience, a particular experience, they usually express how that a Bible passage is more relatable now. And so I guess in your own perspective, I mean, since your accident, is there a biblical character or passage or even principle, maybe all three, which you identify with?
Yeah, there's a couple of passages that have stood out to me a lot, maybe one more than any other. Character would be the Apostle Paul. I have thought a lot about 2 Corinthians chapter 12, where the Apostle Paul discusses the fact that he has a thorn in the flesh, and he says that he besought the Lord thrice, or he prayed to the Lord 3 times to remove this thorn in the flesh, and the Lord said no. There's so many things in that text that grab me now. First, he says that he prayed the Lord numerous times that this be removed. That part's grabbed me, because I have prayed over and over and over that the Lord would remove this or fix me and make me whole again. And it hasn't happened. And I could be tempted to say, well, the Lord's just not answering my prayer. But it could be that the Lord has answered my prayer, because he answered Paul's prayer.
Right.
Now you might say, well, no, he didn't. He didn't remove the thorn in the flesh. He gave him an answer. It was just not the answer Paul was wanting. So that part of it has grabbed me. A second thing there, he says that lest you be exalted above measure with an abundance of revelation. He said he had this thorn in the flesh. He said, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times, and the Lord's answer was, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And so the Lord said, I'm not answering this, but he said, the reason I'm not answering it is because there's some benefit that can come to you from this. I've thought about that a lot. Is there benefit that can come to me? And then the benefit that he specifically said was, well, two things. He said, lest I be exalted above measure. Is that saying that in some sense, Paul's pride was going to get the best of him? That seems to be what he's implying, lest you be exalted above measure because of, abundance of revelation. I think he's saying the Lord had spoken to him and through him, and, that might go to my head. I'm in a sense the apostle. That might get the best of me. So lest I be exalted above measure, the Lord was letting this stay. And he said, but the Lord's answer was this, that my grace is sufficient for you. So the Lord did answer him, and the way he answered was he gave him grace. My grace is going to be sufficient for, so the Lord's taking care of him through this. And then the Lord said, my strength is made perfect in weakness. And so there's something that you're going to grow into, and you're going to be an example. You're going to be made strong because of the weakness that you have. And so I try to think about that sort of thing. I have run this passage through my head probably hundreds of times since then. It's probably my most thought of and pondered passage since this has taken place. And of course, then Paul said, therefore, most gladly, I would rather boast in infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And so whatever his thorn in the flesh was, which seems to me it was some sort of physical infirmity, he says, in light of that answer, then I'm good with it. Right. It's also interesting. It's called a messenger of Satan. It doesn't appear to me that God caused this, but whatever it is, God's going to use it. And I think the same thing is true with me. God didn't cause me to wreck my four-wheeler, and God didn't wreck me. I don't think the Lord's out wrecking people's four-wheelers, but can it now be used? Could it even be that it saved my soul? If Paul said that there was a messenger of Satan that was going to buffet him so that he would not be exalted with an abundance of revelation, could it be that, I might have lost my soul because of pride or arrogance or whatever? And wouldn't it be something if this ends up saving my soul?
Right. It's interesting because Job, he actually begins to think that God was causing the very severe pain and issues that he was facing in his life, but the Bible tells us that he never charged God foolishly. One thing my high school coach taught me was he coined this phrase, and maybe it didn't originate with him, but he was the first person I heard use it. He said adversity will either burst pipes or construct diamonds. And adversity itself has even been called the fuel of greatness. Studies today show that overcoming adversity helps to build resilience. It helps to build that self-confidence that we need in life, not the arrogance if you go too far to the other extreme, but the self-confidence that tells you, hey, you can get up and try again another day. So I guess the question that I want to ask is it possible for adversity to be a good thing? And are there any underlying benefits that it provides in regards to shaping our character and perspective in life?
Yeah, I think suffering, adversity, definitely is a good thing. Not always, and there's a lot of bad things that come from suffering. After I got out of the hospital and I spoke at PTP, one of the things I did was I mentioned some of the benefits that I had experienced from the adversity and the suffering that I had gone through. And I'll mention some of them again. One of them, suffering, adversity brings us closer to God. It teaches us to pray. Many people spend far more time praying when they have gone through adversity. And I know that I have begged the Lord in prayer in ways that I have never begged before. And maybe that's good if it takes away any kind of pride and makes us realize dependence on the Lord. Adversity and suffering makes me not love this world. It could get to the point that a person doesn't want to leave this world because they love this world. Brother Don McWhorter said one time, woe to the man or woman who, let me see, I wrote the quote down. Woe to the man or woman whose life on this earth is so pleasant that he forgets about heaven.
Mm.
And if a person's life, they love this life so much, they don't want to leave it. There's a problem there. Suffering and adversity allows Christians an opportunity for their light to shine. When I was in the hospital, there were so many acts of kindness done toward us. You know, Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify the Father which is in heaven. And so glory is given to the Father when people do acts of kindness. When we were in the hospital, we received approximately 2,800 cards. They kept coming after we got home. The number exceeded 4,000. I have been out of the hospital for 18 months now, something like that, since the accident. And I still have cards that come. I have a woman who sends me a card every single week since I have gotten home from the hospital. She sends me a card. I notice it and I know her name because every single week she sends me a card. A fourth thing that adversity, suffering does is I think it helps us keep a proper perspective on physical possessions. After I got home from the hospital, I had to get rid of so many things. I've gotten rid of tools I bought over the years because I can't use them anymore. One of my most prized possessions was my pickup truck. Not long before the accident, I went out for the first time in my life. I bought exactly what I wanted. Top of the line. I ordered it, waited on it to come in. I got blue, I got leather, I got navigation. It was just my dream truck. And I didn't have it that long. And I had this accident and I got home. I can't get in the truck anymore. And so I tried to climb up in the truck. Well, when you're paralyzed from here down, you've just got your arms and you're dragging this body, and I couldn't do it. And I realized I had to sell it. Of course, my legs don't work, so I can't push the gas and I can't push the brake. And so I've had to have hand controls installed in my van. So I realized I was going to have to sell my truck. And when you realize that, it kind of starts changing your perspective. And it made me realize, as much as it hurt me, it made me realize maybe I love my stuff too much. And it made me think about the rich young ruler, because when Jesus told him he was going to have to get rid of his stuff, the rich young ruler walked away. I mean, he was going to lose his soul over that. And that's when Jesus said in Matthew 19:23, he said, it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. And it made me stop and think, did I have a problem? Could that have cost me my soul? Cost the rich young ruler his soul? And so that's a possibility. I think adversity and suffering humbles us. This entire experience has really humbled me. You know, 1 Peter 5:6, the Lord says, therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. I think about King Nebuchadnezzar, and he walked around his kingdom and said, look at all these great things that I have done. He had to be, in essence, turned into a cow for a while. And that experience humbled him. Suffering makes you sympathetic to what other people are going through, especially as a preacher. You know, we go visit people, and I'm sure you spend time in the hospital and you see things other people are suffering. I see them like I've never seen them before. because I can relate to things that I never experienced before. Romans 12:15 says that we are to weep with those who weep. You're better at that when you've been there. And as I mentioned before, suffering in a sense purifies us, because it makes, what I mean by that is it makes me examine myself. In Psalm 119 and verse 67, David said, I went astray before I was afflicted. I just pondered that for a minute. I went astray before I was afflicted. So we're talking about, you asked me about suffering and adversity. He said, before I had suffering and adversity, I went astray. But after that, he says, I didn't. Then a couple of verses later, or 3 or 4 verses later, verse 71, he says, it's good for me that I have been afflicted, that I may learn your law, your statutes. So he said, suffering and adversity benefited me. It made me turn to the Lord and turn to his word. And so it's not pleasant. I think we've spoiled ourselves that we think life should be all about comfort and, good things, and we should be happy and comfortable all the time. And that's what life is. That's not what life is. Life involves suffering. I think I'm getting more than I want. And none of us want it, but these things can be very good for us. Yeah.
It makes me think of Acts chapter 8, beginning at verse 1, when the Christians there were being persecuted. And you see something remarkable happening. The spread of the gospel essentially it increased. You look back in Exodus chapter, I believe chapter 2, where Israel were being heavily persecuted, and the more that he decided to hurt them, the more they grew. And so it's something remarkable that happens when we go through suffering. It reminds me of John Mosley, who is the head coach over in East Los Angeles Community College. He stated this about basketball, and I never heard this phrase before, but he said basketball doesn't necessarily build character, but it reveals character. In a nutshell, Coach Mosley believes that when we are tested, whether we're tested in competitive sports or whether we're tested in life, we learn something about ourselves. We learn something about our inner man that we would not have known otherwise. And so I guess for you, Brother Dunn, I know that you've thought a lot about this, but what have you learned about you from your accident?
Oh, wow. That's a deep question. There's a lot of emotional struggle that comes from this. I think maybe I learned that I was overly confident in myself. And maybe some of that's dependent upon physical abilities. And it makes me realize how very quickly we can lose these things. It's made me realize more about what's important in life. And as a Christian, as a preacher, I've always known, and I always say these things, but you look at these things differently when you get to this point. It's always been things like if somebody gets a scratch on the wall or a scratch on the car, or that sort of thing would eat me alive. I just couldn't stand that sort of thing. Now it doesn't really matter to me. Why? Because in the scheme of things, it doesn't make a bit of difference. It just really doesn't. And it makes you look back and think, my focus has been wrong. That's not good to realize that about yourself. It's good when you come to that realization. You said a moment ago that pushing yourself, whether it be through suffering or whether it be through sports, it's good and it brings out the best in us. I think the military tries to do that sort of thing to you. I think that's what they do in boot camp and basic training. I remember in a basic training, I was in the Air Force, and they push you and they try to break you, and you do this in a group. And the Bible uses these type of comparisons. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, the Apostle Paul says in verse 25, in fact, if you back up to verse 24, He said, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. That's everybody's running, but he said, you run like you're going to be the one guy who's going to win. That doesn't mean one guy's going to go to heaven, but you push yourself so hard. You work so hard. You're so diligent to keep yourself under control. Then he says, and everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. He's self-controlled. And then he says in verse 26, therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. He says, thus I fight, not as one who beats the air. That is, I'm not just flailing my arms around. I'm very deliberate. I'm training. He says, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest after I've preached to others, I should be disqualified. So he talks about boxing. He talks about running. He talks about training, and he compares these sports things to the Christian life, and is very real. And there are some things about sports that push you and strain you and work you. And some of these same things are true. I never knew much about suffering or pain. I've always been healthy. I've never dealt with this. I live in constant pain now. You have to learn to deal with that, and you have to learn to push yourself. Sometimes I will have a Sunday that I will preach, and I will hurt. By the end of the day, I'm hurting so bad sometimes I can hardly stand it, but you kind of hide it, and you go on, and you shake hands, and you press forward. I was telling my wife, I said, you know, since I got out of the hospital, we haven't missed one single service of the church. And she said, well, there was one time we had that incident. We got there and ended up having to leave because of physical issues. But aside from that, I push myself. I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I said that looking at sometimes how frivolous we can be, and people will forsake the assembly for anything under the sun. And you learn how much you really can push yourself.
So obviously you back in 2019, you mentioned that you were able to get out of the hospital and make it to Polishing the Pulpit to share your story there in front of all of those Christians who were there present. And, you know, research shows that people who share their stories, by sharing their stories, it's almost like we're reaching out into this void of space and telling this person, hey, listen, you're not alone. So Brother Dunn, I have to ask, what drives you? What motivates you to persevere even amid this great deal of suffering that you've experienced?
You know, what goes through my mind on a regular basis now is Philippians 1:21. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. And I think about specifically what he says in verse 23. The King James says, I'm in a strait betwixt two. We don't talk that way, but he means I'm torn between two things. He says, having the desire to depart, he means to die. He says, and be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to abide in the flesh, he says, is better for you. And so he says, for me to live is to live for Christ. And to die, he said, that's what I'd rather do. I would rather go and be with the Lord. Why is that? Could it be the thorn in the flesh? Could it be the suffering that he was enduring? Could it be the persecution? Could it be pushing himself? Could it be the hard work? Could it just be the glory of heaven and wanting to be with the Lord? Whatever it was, he said, that's what I would rather do. And he said, it's far better. He said, but for the sake of the church and for the brethren, it's more needful for me to stay. And this goes through my mind. I want to live faithfully as a Christian, and that drives me now. All through COVID, I've thought about this, that we have maybe lost our focus because we have put so much emphasis on taking care of the physical body that in many cases, the church has suffered. We've let new converts fall by the wayside. We've let churches get weaker. We've not done personal evangelism. We've let, no doubt, souls have been lost because we focus so much on the physical body. And I keep thinking about what Paul says, for me to live is Christ. That is, if I'm going to live, it's going to be about serving Christ. Why? Physical body's not important. He says to die is gain. If the physical body dies, I get to go to heaven. And then he says this part, which is far better. And I've thought about the way some have treated the COVID experience, that we think to live for Christ sometimes is taking, I'm not making accusations at anybody here, sometimes to live as Christ is taking backseat so that for me to live physically can take priority. We got to be careful that way. He says it's far better. What I'm saying is our spiritual life, souls, and our service to Christ has to be number one over everything else. And
Right.
that drives me.
You know, what I would call a mind like Paul is an unbeatable mind. You can't beat a person who would even consider death more of a gain than living itself.
Yeah.
And I remember an apologist stating this about that particular passage in Philippians 1:21. He stated that most people, you can describe the faith of most people as the dot that is within the circle. And so you have a circle and you have the dot. The dot is their faith, the circle is their life.
Mm.
But for Paul, the dot was his life and the circle was his faith.
Mm.
His faith encompassed his life. And so whatever he did, whatever decision he made, it was about Christ. So anyway, just food for thought. I thought that was a remarkable way to explain the Apostle Paul's faith.
Yeah, it's a really good illustration. I heard a friend of mine described it this way. He said a lot of people treat their Christianity like a pie. You've got a slice that's their Christianity, and then there's their work, and then there's their job, and then there's their friends. It's just one slice. And he said we ought to think of Christianity like a wagon wheel. Christianity is the hub, and then your job comes off of that, and your recreation comes off of that, and so forth. Everything is centered around the hub. And so I'm not going to involve a job that doesn't fit in the hub. I'm not going to have recreation that doesn't fit in the hub. Think of Christianity like a wagon wheel, not like a pie.
Absolutely. Those are two remarkable illustrations. I never heard of those before either. But as we sort of switch gears, there's for over 2.5 months now, I have been engaged on a study for on the quest for meaning or for fulfillment, just trying to learn how to be fulfilled as an individual. And it led me to a book entitled The Power of Meaning by Emily Smith. And it's a remarkable book. And she stated this. She said, storytelling is how we make sense of our lives by taking the disparate pieces of our lives and placing them together into a narrative. We create a unified whole that allows us to understand our lives as coherent. And coherence, psychologists say, is a key source of meaning. And so, Brother Don, I guess the question that I have is, do you ever find yourself trying to just simply make sense of the accident and the life altering effects that it had? And if so, do you consider telling your story to be essential when it comes to defining your identity now?
You know, it's kind of a strange thing. You do try to make sense of it, and you find yourself asking questions like, did I do something to deserve this? I know the answer to that is no. And you're thinking, is this payback for something? And you know the answer is no. But you play these kind of games in your mind, and you can see how people in the world and in the religious world, they get caught up in things like that. Biblically, I know that's not the way things work, but your mind wants to make some reason of it. And so, does it help me to tell my story? I think it does. It helps me to explain to others why I'm this way, because I feel like I'm weak. I feel like I've lost something. I feel like I'm not like other people anymore. I feel like, in a sense, I'm less than other people. I know that's not right. I know biblically it's not right, but that's how you feel. And there's a difference in what is logical and what you know and what you feel. And I feel that. And I think by telling the story, I get to tell other people, I used to be just like you are, and I was strong and healthy and could look you in the eye, but this is why I'm that way. Somehow it makes me feel better, I think, to tell people, I used to be just like you. Why is that? I think it's just all emotional, something in your mind. There's something people probably don't think about. And this is probably trivial. It's probably not even worth me offering on the program here, but just as a point of curiosity, when you're in the wheelchair, you're always sitting down and you're looking up at everybody that you talk to. And there is kind of a demeaning feeling that comes with it.
Mm.
Um, I have had, I have a standing wheelchair that can stand me up. I can't move around in it, but it can stand me up. And on the occasions the rare occasion that I have a chance to talk to someone when I'm in the standing wheelchair and I look them eye to eye again, you think, wow, I have forgotten what this is like. It makes you feel like I'm an equal. I can look you in the eye. And then you'll drop back down to sitting in your chair. Is something psychological. Again, I know it's emotional. It's not logical. It's certainly not biblical. It's nothing but a feeling. But I think it's good when you can know the feelings of others and the things that they're going through, because it can help you be considerate of them. I've got a much better perspective now on people who are suffering and who are in pain and who are enduring things like that are emotional. And I know better how to talk to them and how to reach out to them. There's great benefit to that as a Christian. I think that's why it's good sometimes. I tell you what, well, I'm just telling you some trivial things here, getting off of some.
It's totally fine.
I pull into a parking lot now, and you see the only parking space will be that's a handicap space. You'll see someone pulling into it, and they jump out of the car, and they're able-bodied. And I saw someone just recently, they pulled in the spot, jumped out, able-bodied woman. She picked up some boxes in her arms, and she goes walking in carrying these boxes. And then I have to find a spot in a handicap van so that I can back in and get my ramp out and roll up from a distance. And it makes you realize just how inconsiderate people are. When I say inconsiderate, some of them aren't being mean, they're just inconsiderate. They haven't taken the time to consider other people. And that's something it's good for Christians to stop and do, to think about what their brethren are experiencing and to think about what others are experiencing. Something else I've learned from this is the pain doesn't pass overnight. When I had this accident, I think the news of it spread all over the brotherhood. I heard from thousands and thousands of people, and churches I'd never heard of were sending me cards. And so I kind of became famous in the brotherhood for the guy that had that accident. The news of it got around. So it was really big news for a short amount of time. And then the rest of the world moves on with their life. But I still live this every single day. I still get up in the mornings and I still hurt. But the rest of the world moves on. And I've thought about that oftentimes with people who are grieving. You know, a woman loses her husband. We get up and announce it on Sunday morning, Sister so-and-so's lost her husband, and we pour over there and, you know, we give her calls and cards, and we're there for weeks or a month, and then it kind of drops off and we don't say much about it. We expect her to move on, but that woman's grieving and she's going to bed every night alone and suffering, and the emotional part of that is so deep. And this goes on for maybe the rest of her life will be like that. Long after we're not thinking about it anymore, that person's still living it. It's good for Christians to think about that kind of stuff. And maybe we will, you know, the Lord talks a lot about widows and orphans. Of course, James 1 says pure and undefiled religion is to King James says visit, to care for, provide for the widows and orphans. Widows and orphans have a tender place in the heart of God. As Christians, if we can look at people, empathize, think about what they're suffering, understand it, reach out to them in that way, it makes us closer to the heart of God.
Absolutely. Back, I believe it was back in 2017 or prior to that, maybe 2014, there was a study done by Jane Dutton. She is a an organizational psychologist at the University of Michigan, and she conducted this study where she and her colleagues, they went to a Midwestern hospital, relatively large hospital, by the way. And the study specifically was to see whether there uh, was specifically for the janitorial and cleaning staff of the hospital. And it was specifically to see whether their belonging needs were met. So, did they feel like they belong at the hospital? They
Hmm.
chose to focus on this group because dirty work and dirty work is generally not valued by society. You don't see society talking about how important janitors or cleaning staff or cleaning members are. They just sort of overlook them. Um, However, concluding the study, Dr. Dutton and her colleagues realized the powerful role of belonging and how it plays a significant role in our lives. And so she stated this: many of the cleaners told of brief moments where they were ignored and devalued by their fellow coworkers, the doctors and the nurses, and they talked about that experience of hurt and how, though even though it was short, the impact it left on their hearts and minds were seems like an eternity. And they felt like they didn't belong at their place of business, the place that employed both them and the doctors and nurses. So I guess the question is, do you feel that now, since the accident, do you feel that you belong?
I feel like, of course, working with Gospel Broadcasting Network has been a blessing. The staff that I work with there is fantastic. Um, I think I'm really looking forward to getting back into local preaching like I'm about to, because I think it's even going to give me more of that sense of belonging. You want a sense of belonging, you want a sense of worth, and you want to feel like you matter. We
Right.
all want to feel like we matter. A man will work a job where he makes less money, and if he feels like he matters there, because happiness comes from feeling like you belong, people care about you, and you're making a difference and you have worth in life. I remember Brother James Watkins telling me, Brother Watkins, uh, great gospel preacher. He is, I guess he's probably in his mid 90s now. Lost his wife a while back. Brother Watkins told me that before he started winding down, he was doing 40 plus gospel meetings a year. And he said, after he started winding down in his, I guess, mid to late 80s, I talked to him on the phone one day and he said, Don, his words were something to the effect, I don't matter anymore. Nobody wants to have me for a gospel meeting anymore. And that hurt him. And I said, Brother Watkins, you do matter and you're still making a difference. I said, all of the television programs you have filmed for us, which I think is in excess of 800, I said, we're
Wow.
still airing those and you're still converting people, and people call and talk about your programs all the time. You are still doing work in the Lord's kingdom. And that seemed to lift his spirits. We have to feel like we belong and that we matter. Um, there's a part of me that trying to feel like I don't feel like I'm obviously not the same person I was. In fact, I told my wife after the accident, I said, Sherry, I will never be offered a good preaching job again, because I'm a paraplegic, And so when the Willow Avenue congregation called and asked me if I'd be interested in the work there, I was stunned, and it made me feel so very good. In fact, I said to the elder who called me, I said, I'm a paraplegic, right? And he said, we don't care about that. We want you to come preach. And that helps me because again, you shouldn't, but you feel like less of a person because you can't do what you used to do. It's emotional, it's in your head, you have to fight against it. But that's the feelings that you deal with.
When you look at athletes like Bo Jackson, Derrick Rhodes, Paul George, and others who have suffered devastating injuries, they all have engaged in what many would call wishful thinking, where they imagine that the championships they could have won or the records they could have broke, etc., had they not suffered their respective injuries. According to Emily Smith, the author of The Power of Meaning, she said that thinking about alternate paths to one's life, or the alternate path that one life could have taken before the injury, had things turned out differently, is not just engaging in what many believe to be wishful thinking, but is making sense of one's experiences, and in doing so, building meaning. And so this exercise, I know, after doing some research on it, is actually called counterfactual thinking. And psychologists coined the phrase, I think, at least almost 10 or 15 years ago now. And so I guess the question is, have you ever considered what might have been had the accident not occurred? And could you describe all the ways that things could have turned out differently, if not?
Every single day. Um, it is something that you can't get off of your mind. At least I can't get off of my mind, because every single day I think, what might have been, what might I have been doing. And then I think, if the accident hadn't happened, I would have done this, 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 and this. Of course, it was really bad timing for me because I got out of the hospital. It was just a few months, and then COVID hit. So when I first got out of the hospital, I started doing gospel meetings almost immediately. That lifted me up. I felt like I was being useful. I was doing something that I could still do because I could still speak and I could still preach. Then COVID hit and it shut that down. And so I could not even get to the point that I was being effective at all. And that was just adding insult to injury to me. But to your question, do I think about what could have been? It's hard to stop thinking about that, even to the point that Sherry and I have talked about. We've got to stop thinking about what could have been, and we've got to focus on what is. You can torment yourself thinking about what could have been and saying, if my life were only this. And I think we live in a society now where everyone wants to think of their woes and say, if I only had this, then I could do this. Or if I only had that, or if I'd only been born this way, if I only had money, if I only were this race, if I only lived in this country, whatever it is, we've got all these things that hold us back. And I thought, we got to quit thinking that way. And we've got to think, this is what I am, and this is what I have. And these are the resources that are at my disposal for doing the Lord's work. And that's the way I've got to think. And when I can do that, it actually does help me, because I think living in the what if, in a sense, kind of torments me. It's pleasurable to think about what if, because, and it's a strange thing. I'm rambling on to things that you didn't ask me about, but
No, it's fine. Totally fine.
I get to thinking about, I'll have a dream, and in my dream, I'm always fine. In my dream, I can always walk. I'm never in a wheelchair in my dreams. And then I wake up and reality hits me again. And I realize I can't walk. So you have to face that every day. And it makes you wonder, do you ever get past that? Does the time ever come that this will go away? On Facebook, there's a lot of what they call SCI boards. It stands for spinal cord injury. You have to be a spinal cord patient or a caregiver to sign up for one because they're private boards. But then when you get there, you can see the things that people post and how others deal with these things. And that type of community is very helpful. because when I go to work or I go to a congregation of the Lord's church, I'm the only paraplegic there. In fact, almost every place I go, I'm the only paraplegic there. Nobody else knows what I'm going through. They don't know. In fact, if I go to a church, I spoke at one gospel meeting, one of their elders was a paraplegic. Well, that was kind of exciting to me. I wanted to talk to him. He could relate and we could exchange stories, and we understand some things other people don't. So there's a sense in which you feel very alone because no one else understands. And you don't want to spend your time constantly telling other people about your woes and all the things. People get tired of hearing all that kind of stuff. So you've got to move on and be there for other people, not be the burden to others. But yeah, do I think about what could have been? I'm not completely sure. I'm analyzing the quote you made, and in fact, when we get done, I might get you to send me that because I want to ponder that some more. There's a side to that I think can be therapeutic, but there's a point at which you've got to move beyond it and realize I am what I am, and I've got to deal with that. All the people in the world have to realize I am what I am, and I have what I have, and it won't do me any good to sit and dream about being somebody else or having something else because I don't.
Right.
And I'm, I may be the 1 talent man, the 2 talent man, or the 5 talent man, but if I'm the 1 talent man, I got to work with that 1 talent as much as I can to serve the Lord.
Right. Brother Don, it has been inspirational just in the short amount of time that we've been talking to listen to your responses, to hear the very depth of your story, and especially as it relate to the accident. And years ago, a group of young adults who suffer from various physical disabilities actually went on a campaign. I think it was the Museum of Disabilities, and they went on this campaign to start this museum to help people understand, to try to get people to be more considerate about people who suffered from physical disabilities. And eventually they got that museum up and running, and it's still running well today. In fact, I just visited their page earlier, and I think the president actually was bringing on new staff. He was bringing on new sort of new historical references of people who suffer from physical disabilities from the past that I've never heard of. And he's made those things easily accessible for people who don't even have a physical disability, but to encourage them to be more considerate. And so many young adults, they lack the really practical advice, the sound advice, especially those who struggle with this. And many of them view people that has advice, like they view them as people who simply talk about themselves 24/7. And I hope people that watch this and that listen to this episode understand that that's not what it is at all. It's actually a person coming beside someone else saying, as you did with that elder, you want to talk to them as you did at PTP. You're trying to help those who may suffer from the same thing realize that they're not alone. And so as we prepare to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned about this museum of what do you call it?
Museum of Disability.
Museum of Disability. I didn't even know such a thing existed. That's very interesting to me. I would be interested in learning more about that because it is the resources that exist today have made my life so much easier. The fact that I have a handicap van that has hand controls that have allowed me to drive, that I've got a seat that can turn around and I can get into it, that I've got a ramp that comes out and lets me roll up. In fact, there's a, you know what a Segway is? These people ride it and it's kind of self-balancing.
Yes, sir.
There's a company that has created a Segway type wheelchair. It doesn't have back wheels, just one set of wheels, and you sit in it and it's self-balancing. And you can go in the rocks and the grass and the sand and places that you normally couldn't go. And it makes paraplegics and people who can't walk, it makes their life easier. It's called an Omeo. And I have a brother in the church who is actually in an effort to try to raise money to help get me one of those right now, because every piece of equipment makes your life easier. And so that museum would be very interesting. I'm intrigued to see that. But I say all that to say this. I want to thank the Brotherhood, because some of the equipment that I have, the van that I have, was paid for by brethren who reached out to do that, to enable me to preach and keep going. And so it's been the generosity of the Lord's church largely that has helped to give me these devices that have enabled me to keep going and make my life a lot easier. And I owe a great debt of gratitude. And so all of the listeners of your podcast, I would not be surprised if some of those listening contributed, and I express my thanks and gratitude.
And so as we close, I just one last question. What advice would you give to young people who are battling with this same or similar struggle?
I think I would say to them, number one, remember why we are here. Ecclesiastes 12:13, Solomon said, fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. The King James adds the word duty. The word literally carries with it the idea, this is the whole of man. This is why we're here. Keep in mind the reason that you have been put here is not your happiness, it's not your comfort, is to serve God. Keep that in your mind. And then it maybe helps you deal with the suffering and the pain and the agony. Secondly, we got to remember, try not to make excuses. Just remember, I have what I have, and I'm going to use it to the glory of God. And remember that the Lord doesn't leave us or forsake us. If you're his faithful child, he is there. He doesn't always give the answers that we expect, but he is there for us. And if we can remember that, then it's all going to be okay. Like Paul said, to live is Christ and to die is gain.
Amen. Amen. Well, Brother Don, I appreciate you so much for accepting the invitation to be on the show. I know that it would add value to the lives of all of those who will listen. It has certainly added value to my life, and I'm just so thankful that you decided to be on the show today.
Well, thank you so much. Good to be here, brother.
My guest today was Don Blackwell. So thankful for him and coming onto the show and talking about his relatively recent accident. This is a man who hasn't given up the fight. He still chooses to contribute to the rest of humanity. He's still preaching the gospel. He is still doing the work of the Lord. And hopefully, one thing that we take away is that we need to endure hardships, endure those uncomfortable situations, and make the best use of them. I'm a firm believer, as James teaches us in James 1, verses 1 through 3, that if we utilize our trials correctly, they will refine us and build us up, giving us patience and endurance. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.